So the title of my talk indeed is Discrete Analytic Functions and Sure Analysis. And the talk is based, on these papers, really a recent preprint on arXiv with Dan Volok, and a paper with Palle Jorgensen and Ron Seeger, and another paper with Jorgensen on reporting kernel Hilbert spaces generated by the binomial coefficients. And the outline of my talk, there will really be three parts. Really, each will be around 15 minutes. One will be on discrete analytic functions, some background, some maybe new results. Then the middle of the lecture will be really some things which are quite known on classical Schur analysis. But I would like just to explain that all these kind of topics and results, one can have some counterparts in the discrete analytic setting, and then I would like to discuss the Schur analysis setting, the discrete analytic case. Okay, so what is a discrete analytic function? Well, there are various definitions at the beginning, and it's also clear which one to take, but the one we'll take is the one from Jacqueline Ferrand in 1944. So you have a lattice, Z plus IZ, and sometime we'll take another lattice, which will be with a mesh H, but here, or H and K, two meshes, but here it's with mesh 1. And on this lattice, you consider a complex valued function, and it will be called discrete analytic if you have this condition here. So f of z plus 1 plus I minus f of z divided by 1 plus I is f of z plus 1 minus f of z plus I divided by 1 minus I. Now, it may sound a bit out of the blue, and one can think of other definitions, and I will give two justifications with this definition during the talk. The first justification is maybe the following one. You take a mesh H rather than 1, and then you write U plus IV to be the real and imaginary part of a function f, and then you translate the discrete analytic setting condition, and you let H equal to 0, and you get to the Cauchy-Riemann equation. So this is one justification by letting the mesh smaller and smaller if you want. And we'll see another justification using integration in the sequel. Some references, not at all an exhaustive list, but Jacqueline Ferrand and Duffin and my academic brother, Doron Salberger, and Merkat, Smirnov, Lovash, but this is really a very small list, and there are many more people who worked on this. So some example. So the function 1 is trivially discrete analytic. The function z is also discrete analytic. Z square is discrete analytic. The good news is that z cube is not discrete analytic, because if all the powers of z would be discrete analytic, that would suggest maybe not to an interesting story. But z cube is not discrete analytic. The way to see it is you put z equals 0 in the definition, which I rewrote here. And you compute at z equals 0 and z cube, you get 2i on the left, I on the right. And this example, z cube is equal to z times z square, also shows that the product of discrete analytic functions need not be discrete analytic. And a similar phenomena appears also in hypercomplex analysis in other places. So it suggests that there is some underlying richness in the structure. So a question is, of course, as in hypercomplex analysis and some other topics, can we find a product which keeps discrete analyticity? And another condition is, can we correct a bit z cube? I mean, not by adding minus z cube, of course, but can we correct z cube a bit to get a discrete analytic function, maybe preferably a polynomial in x and z? And the same question would be with zn. And the answer is yes, as we will see. So we need, I would like to give another characterization of discrete analytic function, which is more workable, because it's a bit complicated maybe to compute the other differences of values. And we defined two shifts, delta x on the x-axis and delta y on the y-axis, and they commute, and the function is discrete analytic even if df is 0, where d is this operator. So if you want, D is the discrete counterpart of this operator, of a operator delta bar, which from complex analysis. Sorry, I'm going here. Yeah. So as I said, the products, we still have to discuss products, but I would like to mention that every function which is defined on the integers is a restriction, but it's not a unique restriction of a discrete analytic function defined on all of the lattice. If you start with a polynomial, the extension will be unique when you require to be a polynomial of the same degree. This will be used and very important in the sequel. Just since I mentioned one of my work with Jorgensen, Seeger, and Volok, I would like to mention that in that paper, we consider two products, but here we are looking at a product which is in terms of what we call their expandable functions, just to avoid any confusion. So a very important, would like to mention here now to mention a very important notion. We'll discuss, it will be the analog of the exponential in some sense. So we define this function zeta n of x of 0. So it's a discrete, it is a restriction on the not real axis, excuse me, but on the integers of a discrete analytic function, which we'll call it zeta n of xy, which will be unique because of an extension which I mentioned in the previous slide. And we have this generating function here. And as I will show in one of the next slides, this generating function will be the role of the exponential. You see here, maybe you don't see the factorial n, but it is hidden here. It's just easier to write the notation without the factorial n in this definition, but the factorial n is in the background, as you can see here. And expandable functions are really series in functions of zeta n of xy. As I said, this gz of t, so if you see, it's a function of t, of a complex variable t, and of a z, and z is on the lattice. And let me just repeat that z with this square bracket is the exponential, is the discrete analytic polynomial extension of this function, of this coefficient. Okay, so this function gz of t plays an important role. It was already introduced a long time ago, I mean, one way or another by Ferrand and other people. And when you make the computation, and I will outline the proof in one of the next slides, you do not get at all an exponential, you get the following formula. And you see that, so here alpha plus minus are these numbers. And then you have, you get 1 plus t to the power real part of z, and this part to the power imaginary part of z. So if real part of z is positive, you get an analytic function of t in the open unit disk. A bit more, that would be if the real part of z is negative. And if the real part of z is positive, you have analyticity in a slightly bigger domain in the disk centered at the origin and with reduced square root of 2 because of a modulus of alpha plus and minus. As I mentioned, it plays the role of the exponential function, and this formula here, once you know the expression for gz of t, this formula is quite trivial. I mean, because of course the real part here is in the exponential is additive, and the same thing for the imaginary part. Okay, so let me give a brief idea of the proof. You check that gz is a common eigenvalue of delta x and delta y. This is very important. Just to say that there was another domain which was developed with Viktor Vinnikov in the compact human surface, which is much more complicated to tell the truth, but where there also one has two shifts, and the common eigenvalues of the two shifts play the role of a kernel, and here we have something similar. So you check that gz is a common eigenvalue of the two shifts. You check that it satisfies this property because of the eigenvalues here, so it's discrete analytic, and then use uniqueness of a polynomial. So the reason I put this slide really is to stress out the importance of the two shifts. One shift would not be enough here. In opposition, if you want, with a classical case where you have a backward shift and basically in one variable, I mean, and that's enough. I had mentioned at the beginning that the discrete analytic function, one way was having the mesh goes to 0 and we get to the Cauchy-Riemann equation. Now, another possibility, another approach to discrete analytic function would be via path integrals. So I didn't draw figures or pictures on my slides, but basically you see that you imagine what is a path on this lattice, and one defines the integral in such a way, and the function is discrete analytic if and only if for every closed path the integral is 0. This is really what we teach our students in complex variable in the classical setting. So this is, if you want, another justification in some sense of discrete analyticity, of the original definition of discrete analyticity, which was due to Ferrand in 44. And here I just want to mention the following result, that if you have a discrete analytic function, also the integral would be discrete analytic. Okay, so we want to have a counterpart with a Schur analysis on the space H2 and forward shift and backward shift. So it appears the forward shift here is this operator Z. Let me give a spoiler and backtrack 1 minute to say that in the RD space we will have the adjoint of this forward shift will be exactly, excuse me, I wanted to go backwards. Well, sorry, I have a problem here. Sorry, this is it would be the operator delta X. Now, the image of a discrete analytic function by this forward shift is discrete analytic. And we have this formula, which gives an alternative definition, if you want, of these functions Zn, which a priori may sound a bit strange the way I introduce them. But when you introduce them in terms of this shift, then it's very natural and it gives a parallel with a classical case. Because basically, when you look at the polynomial function Zn, then it is really multiplication by Z iterating n times over value 1 of the constant function 1. And if you want some hint at realization theory and rational functions, here there is a rational function that is written here, but some hint, well, you have this, this is just a formal formula meanwhile, because I did not say where is boundedness and so on. And you see that here, this -1 here is just a formal way to write that have these strange powers of n for Z. So, as I said, as a spoiler, this operator Z is a counterpart of a forward shift operator, but it remains to ask what is the RD space, are there Bellinglax theorems? In the classical setting, the adjoint of MZ of a forward shift operator multiplication by Z is a backward shift operator. Here, the backward shift operator is delta X, the shift on the X-axis. I didn't mention this on the slides. But the question would be, are there backward shift operators, backward shift subspaces, a branch of next spaces? I will try to answer some of these questions in the sequel. The product we will take is the convolution on this strange Z to the power n. It corresponds to multiplication by Z for the operator capital Z, so it's in some sense quite natural. And we'll see that there is an isomorphism between the RD space we define and the Zn of the classical RD space. And in some sense, there are two kinds of results, really. One which you obtain directly via this isomorphism, and some which are a bit more complicated. And in some sense, you can say that this is the extension of the pointwise product in the RD space, the convolution product, which I mentioned here. Of course, this convolution product maybe is not a surprise. Such products originate a long time ago with Fliess and other people, but here this is a product we are using. So, as I would like to stress out, that in the size hyperholomorphic function setting, which was of interest for me recently, then there are other products which are using, for instance, the Cauchy-Kovalevsky theorem. Here, it is not the same strategy. in the sense that we don't look at the product on the real axis and do some extensions, which would be the case for the Cauchy-Kovalevskaya theorem on in hypercomplex analysis. So I mentioned at the beginning that the talk will be divided in 3 parts. These 3 and the first part of the lecture. Now I will make a long detour. I'm in a third of the lecture on classical function theory in the open unit disk. And I realize that a lot of things I will say are well known, but I think very important to put all this material into perspective. So let's pay our tribute to Zaremba. A positive definite kernel is, so you have a set omega. The definition is, the terminology is very unfortunate because there is nothing definite there. The functions are just non-negative, but the kernel is said to be a positive definite if all these functions are non-negative for every choice of n and z1, zn. And as associated to every positive definite function, there is a unique reproducing kernel Hilbert space with these 2 properties. So meaning really that the function k for a given omega and as a function of z belongs to a space, and you have this reproducing kernel property. And if you want equivalently, it means that the point evaluations are bounded. So if you want, it's by Riesz theorem for bounded functionals in a Hilbert space. An example which will be important in the sequel is this Szego kernel, which is positive definite in the open unit disk. The associated reproducing kernel Hilbert space is the classical Hardy space, 3 Z transforms, if you want, of L2 sequences. And one more spoiler, we'll here have something similar, but here with the strange powers, which I defined in one of the previous slides. I want to define a Blaschke factor, and there is 2 reasons for that. One reason is to have an example, but the second reason is that we'll see that one of the differences we have here between the discrete analytic and the classical cases are with the Blaschke factors. But with this Blaschke factor, you have this classical formula, which is a 1-dimensional reproducing kernel formula, if you want, and you have this. So you see, this is a reproducing kernel, but on purpose, I rewrite in such a way. And the reason for that is that in a number of situations, and that will be the case for the discrete analytic setting, sometimes this would not make sense, but this makes sense when you would replace MZN by, for instance, the shift we defined. So this, in the classical case, these two expressions are the same, but in some cases, this is more general. I don't want to say general, we're not speaking of a generalization of complex analysis, but in some cases, this makes more sense than in a classical case. Similar for Schur functions. So when you have a Schur function is a function which has analytic and contractive in the open unit disk, they bear other names, I should say, in particular in linear system, in engineering. But equivalently, this kernel here, 1 minus S of Z, S of omega bar divided by 1 minus Z omega bar is a positive definite kernel on D. And here on purpose, I rewrite this kernel in such a way. This expression will make sense in our setting, that expression not so much. So a Schur function, a function is a Schur function if and only if the multiplication by S is a contraction from the Hardy space into itself. This is only the tip of the iceberg. Behind this are all analytic extension theorems due to Donoghue and other people, but I will not go into them here, into these results. And then, so the operator 1 minus MS star is non-negative. Its square root is a space. It's really the Branch-Rovniak space associated with S with the operator range norm. And this framework operator range extends to a number of settings like time varying, quaternionic, and the discrete analytic, which I want to which is a main topic here. So this operator range is very, very important. Another condition, characterization of Schur function, which really originates in the little book of the Branch and Rovniak in 66, square several power series, is the so-called backward shift realization. I here mentioned another reference, Otis 96, where it is a setting of Montragin spaces operator valued functions. But basically, it means that you can write S of Z in such a form where the operator matrix is co-isometric. You have also isometric, unitary, and it's not rational, even if S is rational, and it's unique in general, I mean, and it's unique under certain conditions. If you want to stick to rational functions and minimality in this, well, not necessarily, but if you want to stick to rational functions, then there is a well-known Kalman-Yakubovich-Popov lemma, which will say that you can choose this matrix, a matrix now, and it will be a contractive. So the Berling-Lax theorem, and we'll try to have a similar here, it means really that when S is inner, the space H of S is a orthogonal complement of a Berling invariant space. When S is contractive, you have other versions of the Berling-Lax theorem, where H of S is contractively included in the Hardy space. You can also leave the Hardy space when you leave another more general setting in the indefinite case, but I will not go into them. Here I mentioned a number of references on these Branch-Rovniak spaces. There are numerous references, and I apologize for people I didn't quote, but I wanted to quote really the original book of the Branch-Rovniak and this two-volume book of Friquin and Masregui on the theory of H of B spaces, of these Branch-Rovniak spaces. So an important point here, which will be true also in our case, is that you have usually you have contractive inclusion rather than isometric inclusion. I would like to make a detour, leave the open unit disk and go to the upper triangular Hilbert-Schmidt operators. The reason for that, and it is already a one slide hint at the time varying case, to explain why the setting of multiplication operator ranges, and so on, makes sense in quite a number of other top domains, with motivation from linear system theory, from signal processing, for instance. So it's really a one slide for a very involved topic. You look at the upper triangular Hilbert-Schmidt operators from L to Z into itself. It's a Hilbert space. You take an upper triangular contraction. So you have now, it defines a multiplication operator from U2 into U2. And so you can discuss, you can also here speak of an operator range. And here too, you have the counterpart of the Branch-Rovniak spaces, realization, and so on. And now the complex numbers are replaced by diagonals. But the main point I want to make in this slide is to say that as we had a multiplication operator in the complex setting, as we will have a counterpart of multiplication operator in the discrete analytic setting, here I wanted to explain this, but we have also in settings which may be unexpected, like the upper triangular contraction. Of course, this inequality here is a well-known inequality in operator theory, but it has a very important importance in this application. This is really the point I wished to make here. So what are two questions we have is what are the counterparts in the setting of discrete analytic functions of these kernels, and why consider such a problem? To give some motivation why consider such a problem, I would like to discuss very briefly the linear system theory. So in the classical, to see that we can maybe have some counterpart in the discrete analytic setting. Before that, maybe let me recall, and this is really a general point of view, that if you take a function S, which is analytic and contractive in the open unit disk, and what is of importance here, it's the term once more is generalization. The term should be counterparts in various settings. It can be seen, for instance, as a contractive multiplication operator. I insisted on that. It can be seen as a characteristic operator function of a contraction. Then you give models, and later extended by Lifshitz, as I said, to pairs of operators on compact Riemann surfaces. It can be viewed as a transfer function of a dissipative time-invariant linear systems. The scattering function, when you take the Cayley transform, you get a function of a positive real part, and you have links with stochastic processes and operator models, and also inverse scattering. So here you have, if you want, 5 facets of a given function. And when you have a counterpart of such a function in a different setting, and for what we have at mind here, the discrete analytic function, it's interesting to see their direct counterparts or not. In some cases, it's clear. In some cases, it's not so clear. So I would like to mention the Schur algorithm. The reason for that is that we'll see that here we don't really have a Schur algorithm, not so directly. So this is really associated to a Schur function by this sequence of numbers called the reflection coefficient. This is really what I wrote here, and this consequence is really the consequence of a Schwarz lemma. And it allows to associate to a function S a sequence of numbers which are called the reflection coefficients, which are really the values of this function Sn at 0. Here it will be a bit different. This is the reason I explained it. And so the Schur coefficients here allow to get, for instance, partial fractional expansion, but we will not have this here, at least not directly. I mentioned Schur analysis. So Schur analysis, I will discuss also linear systems in a couple of slides. If you want, it can be seen as a collection of problems and methods pertaining to operator models, interpolation of analytic function, inverse scattering in one, and several complex variables, and we want the counterparts beyond complex analysis. I will skip this slide on systems using Schwarz-Kernel theorem. This is my favorite slide. Really, the real definition for linear system we use distributions and Schwarz-Kernel theorem, but here I will be much more mundane and explain what a system is via an input-output. So here you have input sequence, here you have the output sequence. It could be numbers, it could be operators, it could be a lot of things. Hn is the impulse response. If we stick to something very easier and look at numbers, you take the Z transform, you just get surprise or multiplication operator. This function, provided the Z transform, the power series converge, of course, is the transfer function of impulse response. And the property of the H corresponds to the property of the system. For instance, dissipativity will exactly correspond to a function S being analytic and contractive in the open unities, that is a Schur function. So, excuse me. So another approach to system, which I would like to mention before going back to discrete analyticity, are the state equation of Kalman. So we still have here a UN, an input, and a YN, an output, but it goes via a state XN. Here, ABCD could be matrices, could be operators, possibly unbounded. There is a whole world. Keeping things simple here in this talk, let's say matrices, you get a realization of a transfer function via a realization. So we see once more the notion of realization. To conclude, I would like to, so we saw a rational function. I would like to mention that rational functions can be defined in number of equivalent class definition in the classical case. And you would see in each domain what one concept counterparts of Schur analysis, not all these definitions make sense. So let's say if you take, let's say, matrix valued rational function analytic at the origin, it would be a question of polynomial, it would have a realization. You can characterize it in terms of its Taylor coefficients. In terms of an Henkel operator, by the way, this characterization of Henkel operator, so there is this book by F. Grafov of complex analysis exercises for Moscow State University. And this is like one exercise among others. It looks like a very simple exercise, but I'm not so sure it is so simple, at least to a second-year student. Anyway, there is this characterization in terms of Henkel operators, and also in terms of backward shift inverse spaces here. So we have another definition I didn't mention here would be as a meromorphic function of a Riemann sphere. I mean, but here we are interested at what would be the counterpart, if you want, in the discrete analytic functions. Here I mentioned a number of possibilities of extending Schur analysis. I would like to stress out two of well, some very interesting, which leads to fascinating mathematics are the Drury-Iverson spaces and Schrödinger spaces. But I would like to mention in the polydisk slightly forgotten paper by Serban Turku and Najim, where they do slices of function on the polydisk. And Viktor Venikov, in his first talk on the first day, mentioned compact Riemann surfaces. This is a really fascinating extension. And but I will not mention the other. Just to mention, there are a lot of possibilities. Yet another one I would like to mention is Champhy and Dufresnoy. So a long time ago, in the 50s, 60s of the previous century, and motivated by number theory, the Peso number, so nothing to do with systems or whatever, they got to the notion of generalized Schur functions and the generalized Schur algorithm, where the kernels, which I said were positive definite, now are allowed to have a number of negative squares. I will not go into the details here, but just mention that it is quite fascinating that going from a number theory and Peso numbers, you get to independently to the same notion. Okay, so let us go back now in the last part of the talk to what are VRD spaces, what are Schur functions, what are rational functions, interpolation, and so on. This is really the program we want to do in for discrete analytic functions, and in part is already presenting in the preprint I mentioned with Dan Volok, which is on arXiv right now. So let me remind you that we have this lattice here, Z plus IZ. I stick here to the mesh one, but you can take another mesh, of course, or two meshes. Excuse me, one on the x-axis and one on the y-axis. We define by lambda plus the part of a lattice which is on the right. I remind you the definition of the forward shift operator and this strange powers of Z, if you want. These are discrete analytic functions. These are functions which are defined on the lattice, that you remind. Well, this notation, this F hat is just a hint to have reanalysis, but it's just a number. It doesn't mean anything at this stage. This will converge if and only if this lim sup is less than square root of 2. You might think why square root of 2? This is because of the function alpha plus, the numbers alpha plus minus, which was at the beginning of the talk. I will not remind them now. So sometimes it goes a bit beyond the unit circle. Then this series converges absolutely, and the function is discrete analytic, and you have this. And of course, you can say that here a factorial n is missing. It is not missing, it is in the background. But it is not written here. It makes things just much easier. But it has not been forgotten. So our RD space, maybe it's not so much a surprise, will be this power series where the coefficients are in L2, with this inner product. And it has this as it's a reproducing kernel Hilbert space of functions defined on the right lattice, on the x plus I z, where x is a positive integer and z is an integer, and this is the reproducing kernel. Now, so it looks similar. So the same phenomena arise in quite a number of topics. For instance, also in the time varying setting, you replace the z to the power n by an appropriate quotation mark zn. Now, in the classical setting, the adjoint of a backward shift operator is multiplication by z. In this RD space, the same thing holds, but and this, in some sense, this result gives an independent, I don't want to say justification, but I don't know, of this definition. You have this forward shift, you have this backward shift. In this space H2, let me backtrack the definition. In this space H2, then you see that the adjoint of delta x is z, and you have also this, I call it the structural identity, but it really means that in the classical case, this really means that 1 minus R0 star R0 is the evaluation at 0. The E0 star just embed the complex number inside the RD space. So we have a total parallel here between the two. Now, good news and bad news. You look at this operator T between the RD space I defined and the classical RD space. it's unitary. So one could think that all is translated directly and there is nothing to do. The bad news or good news is that the image of a kernel, so in the discrete analytic setting, this is a function which is of interest for us, goes into this strange function, so not at all the Zego kernel. And this creates, if you want, the novelty or the difficulty in the arguments. Gz of t, so this was defined, this is this was defined in such a way, this is the counterpart of the exponential function. So there are Fock space in the background. You can see them also in the paper with Seeger. I will not mention connection with Fock spaces here, but there are Fock spaces. This is a counterpart of the exponential. Discrete analytic Schur functions are defined in such a way, this kernel being positive definite. If you recall, I mentioned that in the classical case, this kernel can be written in such a way, and there both definitions make sense. Here, this is the definition which makes sense. Recall that these are functions on the lattice, on the right lattice. These are not functions of a complex variable. But there is, well, of course, there would be a way to define this kernel, but that would require kind of interpretation, not a direct way. This is a direct way using operator theory. Now, a Schur function is a function discrete analytic will be a Schur function if and only if this multiplication operator with a convolution I mentioned is a contraction. So here too, you will have the Branch-Rovniak spaces. So we have once more your contraction operator, but the multiplication is not the one would think. And I had here a proof, an outline of a proof. I will not discuss it, but these are really classical results from classical methods from Rapotzin kernel spaces. And if this is the Rapotzin kernel of a discrete analytic RD space, and this is the convolution multiplication by the discrete analytic function, this is the kernel of the current, the Branch-Rovniak space. So the same formula, which is, but with different objects, of course. The same formula is for time varying setting and other settings, but with different objects. So if you look this operator T between the RD space, the discrete analytic RD space and our RD space, it maps into multiplication. So this is really the one more motivation for a convolution product. It's an extension of a pointwise product, but on the unit disk rather than the real axis. So we look at functions on the real axis in the discrete analytic setting. I would like to mention that the Z operator, as I mentioned, and the corresponding product will make sense on more general graphs. Our aim is to look at a later stage on more general graph and leave the realm of a lattice. And well, rather the delta X and delta Y, they make sense basically only on the lattice. So this is why I think this operator Z is more important. Let me give an example. So we have this G of Z. This function, I claim that this function is a Schur function. The way is to look at its image under this operator T. Is this my notation here is horrible? This Z here is in the lattice, and this Z in the open unit disk. I should have put here a zeta. I apologize for that. In any event, this is a function analytic and contractive in the open unit disk. And so this one is a Schur function, a discrete analytic Schur function. At some stage, we use this as a notation, meaning that we have by this notation here, we mean, by this strange minus circle, we mean this power series. So Berlin-Lax, we have also your Berlin-Lax theorem, which is obtained by the isometry with the RD space, and we have also the branch structure theorem, but I will not mention them here. I would like to mention towards the end of the talk a difference. So if you want to study the counterpart of Schur analysis, so you would like to maybe look at interpolation, and a natural problem would be to have interpolation. I wrote here H of K, I mean the RD space, I meant here the discrete analytic RD space. And you would think that maybe we can solve in a nice way, I mean, this interpolation problem with a given point, but it doesn't really work like this because the problem is that the underlying kernel is not backward delta x invariant. It doesn't live to a delta x invariant space. So under the image by the isomorphic the classical space, you wouldn't get a backward shift invariant subspace. So really you have to look at all the values. So you have your point Z, which is somewhere on the right lattice. It defines a minimal rectangle. And in fact, the interpolation problem, which has a nice, well, here I look, my slide is, sorry. So you look at the smallest rectangle, so it will not be the same rectangle if imaginary part of lambda is positive or negative, but you look at the smallest rectangle on the lattice, which is defined by this lambda. And the interpolation problem can be solved when we view all the values 0 to be equal to 0 in this for all these points, values at all these points, and not only at the point lambda. So I lambda, let me repeat, is the smallest rectangle which is defined on the lattice by the point lambda. And here you get once more, so you have a certain counterpart of a Blaschke, B lambda, and I will give it in my next slide, which will be one of the last slides. So the difference here is that these are really the Blaschke factor which appear, and they are really a very specific form. Let me explain in the next slide. So we define this B plus minus. This is the counterpart of this is, sorry, I missed. This is the counterpart of a Blaschke, but then the Blaschke factor which we consider is really this one. So it's quite different from the classical setting. So if you want by this, my next slide is the last slide, I think. What I want to point out by this example is that part of the result when you go from the discrete analytic to the classical, from the classical case to, sorry, when you look at the isomorphism between the discrete analytic setting, the RD space, and this classical space, some of the results are straightforward, but some are not, and some are surprising, like I think this kind of Blaschke. Another surprise, but I didn't discuss it in this slide, is the links with the Fock spaces and some spaces which are included in Fock spaces. Some of these results are in the paper with Seeger and Volok and Jorgensen, which I mentioned in the introduction. So if you want, I wanted to mention that en guise de conclusion, a Schur analysis is possible in this setting. You have two main differences from the classical setting. There is no product, there is no law of composition for a product. This is quite classical, and the reproducing kernel is not an eigenvalue of a backward shift. This really creates a problem here, and this is what leads to new phenomena. The counterpart of a Szego kernel now is really the counterpart of an exponential function, and this is really the counterpart. And this will end my talk. Well, I thank you for your attention, and we'll answer questions if you have. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank Daniel Alpe for this very interesting talk on discrete Schur analysis. Now, I teach an elementary course on linear systems and was particularly interested in the discussion of the many different perspectives that people can take on Schur functions. So I'd like to ask Daniel, what for the newcomer and student is the best perspective to have on Schur functions of all these many different ways of viewing them?
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe the realization, having a realization, I mean, writing it as a D plus, let me see if I can sorry, one moment, let me go here. Allow me to go back once. Yeah, maybe to write it as where was it? as a realization like this using the states equation and speaking on the first on the rational case on the first level, and then explaining that it can be much more complicated, maybe. But I think it's more an iteration. I mean, one should, how should I say? I would start with a realization, I think, yes. Because here you can explain it without, it's a difficult question, your question, because for each approach, I would say I can see disadvantages and advantages. But if your students have background in functional analysis, I would say multiplication operator from H2 into H2. And then it leads you to have a realization in terms of a backward shift and so on. So that would be one possibility. If you want more motivation, that would be using state space equation, for instance. But if I go
Thank you.
But it's a bit
difficult. I'll pass this on to my students.